Richard and Karen purchased their parents a new home on Newville Avenue in where else? Downey. Richard and Karen moved in, unwilling or unable to break up the family nucleus. In late '71, the Carpenters released their third album, The Carpenters, featuring Rainy Days and Mondays and Superstar.
Far away, I fell in love with you before the second show.
The Carpenters nearly didn't release the song as Richard felt the lyrics were a bit too racy for Karen. In early 1972, when they finally got a moment at home, Richard and Karen were profiled by local Los Angeles reporter and later anchorman Jerry Dunphy. His television show gave Carpenter fans a rare look at their personal life.
They've sold 16 million records in the past 2 years. Karen, at 21, and Richard, 25, are millionaires. They own apartment houses and shopping centers. They still live at home with their parents in the not especially fashionable community of Downey.
After a brief look around the house, Richard talked with obvious pride about the Carpenters' success.
Well, I guess I could ask, are you a millionaire?
Yeah, we are.
You say we are. Are you a millionaire?
Yeah, Karen and both.
Separately?
Separately,
Not,
yeah.
not together?
No.
You don't have to pool to be a...
No.
Though millionaires, they were not ostentatious. Karen's bedroom wasn't fancy, just thoroughly feminine, home to a menagerie of stuffed animals and Disney memorabilia. Richard's room was exceedingly sparse. The only room that was extensively outfitted was their in-home studio.
We've got quadraphonic sound. That's the newest thing. 4-channel stereo. It's about 125 watts per channel.
Karen took the opportunity to respond to critics who accused Richard of producing blatantly commercial music.
That's one of the things that people think. They say, how did you figure out where to aim and to sell records? And that's one thing you can't do.
They thought it was a master plan,
Yeah, they do, and it's not. It doesn't happen that way because what we did was when we finally did get a chance to cut a record, we just did what we felt we could do the best and the arrangement that came out of his head.
Though relaxed and competent, Richard and Karen were stunned by their sudden success. Richard struggled to explain the Carpenters' appeal.
I'm sure there's some people who would think that, there's some people who think I look like a hippie. I mean, they're that square that they think that I look wild or, that we sing rock and roll music just because we have guitar amplifiers.
Yeah.
Then there's other people that think that we're so square that they don't believe how we can exist. But there are people of all ages that, that we do appeal to.
Yeah.
Coming up, Richard falls in love and infuriates Karen.
The minute that he showed 1 ounce of happiness, she would have to put the stick between his wheels.
By 1972, the Carpenters were bona fide rock stars. They had money and fame, but they were never able to enjoy them. The next 5 years would be, in essence, a marathon tour, one that eventually took an exacting toll on both Richard and Karen. In 1972, the Carpenters released their 4th album, A Song for You. It featured another hit single, Hurting Each Other. Here is a rare glimpse of the two at work at A&M Studios.
Can we stop hurting each other? We go on hurting each other, making each other.
There were 2 big changes in the Carpenters' camp at this time. First, over Karen's objections, Richard got rid of producer Jack Doherty, remembers Carpenters studio musician Chuck Findlay.
He said to her that he wanted to be the producer or else, kind of basically that was the way it was laid out. So he became the producer of the group, and Jack Doherty was gone, and he was history.
Second, Karen was being encouraged to stop hiding behind the drums, recalls Hal Blaine, who was the Carpenters' studio drummer.
I said, why are you even thinking about playing the drums? I mean, you've got all these hit records now, the money's rolling in. You're now, let's face it, a big recording star. You could be up there in front of a microphone leading this thing, singing this thing.
In the middle of 1972, the Carpenters set out on an extensive tour, from Cleveland to Buffalo to Toronto to Memphis. The Carpenters crisscrossed the country, recalls Bill Skiles of Skiles and Henderson, a longtime Carpenter opening act.
They were very young, and first, especially new in traveling on daily grind on these tours. Very difficult. You know, that's hard to do.
And according to former A&M Promotions manager Harold Childs, the Carpenters were dead serious about promotion.
They would do interviews all day before they went on stage. They would do interviews backstage. They would do a concert and then come out and sign autographs.
Plus, Karen worried about record sales.
Karen was the business lady. I mean, as far as I know, where's the bullet today? You know, how many records we're selling.
The Carpenters' stage show was basically a note-by-note recreation of their hit songs, recalls music critic Paul Grine.
In the early years, they put on very musical shows. There wasn't much flash. There wasn't much personality.
Karen was the consummate professional, remembers comedian Pete Henderson.
4.5 years, I never heard Karen Carpenter hit a sour note. I mean, any off-pitch notes. I mean, she was always bang dead on.
The miles rolled by, New York to San Diego to Las Vegas.
When you come in to do a concert, you run in and you're in there for like a rehearsal during the afternoon, and nobody is usually allowed into the rehearsals. And then you go get dressed and you do the show, and then zoom. You know, you're either gone right away or else you're in the dressing room doing interviews and things.
The Carpenters and their staff and their families and the roadies became a family unto themselves.
They had their world that they traveled with, their portable environment. You might say she had her hairdresser and this and that, and they had the band, and it was like a little fraternity.
Richard and Karen were at the center of the group, and everyone else circled them protectively, especially Karen.
She was protected in a sense, and I can understand her age and how good she was, and everything's riding on her and Richard. A lot of people around were very protective of Karen.
So protected that she rarely dated.
All those years, it was primarily business, and her life was on hold, I think, in romantic versions, whatever. Never the slightest, thought of that with anybody, because nobody was around.
Somebody was around for Richard, however. He fell for a member of the entourage, Maria Galeazzi, who was Karen's hair and wardrobe lady. It was a relationship that would have a lasting effect on Karen, Richard, and their mother Agnes. It started in Brownsville, Texas, on a freezing cold night.
I remember getting in bed and the sheets were wet. We couldn't get heat. I had to go to bed dressed. That's how Richard and I got together. I mean,
It's too cold.
I tried to keep from freezing. That's all it was.
That was enough. Maria and Richard started dating, but manager Sherwin Bash did not approve.
I think he was apprehensive, but, he couldn't stand up to Richard, because, Richard obviously had made his decision, and it was his to unmake it.
Nor was Karen pleased.
She was passive-aggressive. In other words, she wasn't verbal. She didn't rant and rave, but I think her aggressiveness came out in another way.
That way, at first, was subtle.
Very seldom did we go out on a date alone. It was usually the three of us. So, if Karen went out on a date, then she didn't take us. But if we went out, she came with us.
Later, it was out-and-out harassment.
The minute that he showed 1 ounce of happiness, she would have to put the stick between his wheels. And it was very annoying, I tell you, because I had to not only hold on to the job and do it well, and I didn't have a problem with that, but to have to tolerate her nitpicking and her mannerism towards our relationship. In other words, her reaction all the time.
And guess where Richard was? Stuck between a rock and a hard place.
He, I think, suffered more, even though he just didn't know what to do, because he wanted to please me, he wanted to please her, and he didn't want to upset the apple cart.
To get time alone, Richard and Maria would take off in Richard's Ferrari, the centerpiece of his growing car collection. Eventually, Richard got around to telling Mom and Dad about his new girl. Harold was supportive, but not Agnes.